Here's Lester Holt.
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air to bring you live coverage of President Trump's meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un as they begin their second summit. You can hear behind me sirens. The president's motorcade has just passed our location. This is their second summit. It is Wednesday evening here in Hanoi. The two leaders about to come face to face for the first time since their initial meeting last June in Singapore. This summit comes at an extraordinary and precarious moment for the president as his former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, testifies publicly before Congress just a few hours from now, something the president is likely to be keeping an eye on during the summit here. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson joins me here in Hanoi. We're expecting these two to come together at the Metropole Hotel, which is about 10 minutes from where we are. Walk us through what's going to happen, Hallie.
The two of them are going to greet each other, just like we saw last summer at the Singapore summit, Lester. They'll have we believe they'll shake hands. They'll go and have a private meeting, just the two of them, one-on-one, of course, with interpreters in the room. That is scheduled to last for about 20 minutes. That is significant in that who knows, right, what these two leaders will say to each other, what they will commit to each other, if anything, in that room. And then after that, there will be a small dinner as we take a look now.
This is the presidential limousine and motorcade now arriving, and they have quickly shrouded it. They had been erecting this tented makeshift garage, if you will, to bring him in the entrance of the hotel.
Security's been so intense here, and you know that the North Korean delegation in particular has, as well as the U.S. delegation, has a major priority for security for Kim Jong-un as you see the rest of the motorcade lining up. After this one-on-one meeting, Lester, they're going to be having a small dinner, very small. It's just going to be on the U.S. side, President Trump, his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. On the North Korean side, it'll be Kim Jong-un and two of his top aides who are familiar with these nuclear negotiations, who have been part of these nuclear negotiations in the past. And so they will have this discussion pre the summit, which is not until tomorrow, of course. So this is, you could call it a bit of an appetizer to the main course. These are the top principals who will be hashing out potentially some of the framework for the summit discussions down the road. But when you look at the dynamic in the room, it is going to be intimate. The president has repeatedly talked about his relationship with Kim Jong-un. This friendship, he says, that they have developed between letters that have passed between the two men over the last several months and even prior to that. And so potentially this is a moment and an opportunity for the president to sort of work that relationship. And by the way, for Kim to do the same, with some real concerns among experts in the field that Kim could flatter his way to some concessions by the U.S.
Well, and what you walked through in terms of the schedule was the schedule. Now, this is President Trump, and we know sometimes he will do surprises.
Sure.
Remember last time he offered Kim Jong-un a tour of his limousine.
That's right.
And that took place. So we don't expect an announcement tonight after this meeting. But
we simply don't know. There's
know.
a small group of reporters, of course, traveling with the president. That's how we're getting the video that we're getting. And even though there is no expectation necessarily that the president will, for example, deliver remarks, Lester, you've seen this before. We've seen this before. He may certainly turn to the cameras and make an address, and Kim may do the same. We've seen the president in the past prompt Kim to speak, and he has through his interpreter, and so that is something we'll be watching for over the next 40 minutes or so.
We should note that it was essentially a secret here until maybe 24 hours ago as the exact location of where this meeting took place. Now, those of us who were staying in that area, it was quite obvious what was happening there as you saw teams of Secret Service and North Korean security agents and communications teams and equipment. It was pretty obvious it was going to be happening at this hotel.
My colleagues and I happen to be staying at a different hotel where, by the way, Kim Jong-un and the North Korean delegation are staying as well. The security is intense, not just at the hotels, of course, but throughout the city, as Hanoi was picked, as you know, for a very specific reason. The president has talked repeatedly about using Vietnam as an example for what North Korea could be or could become. As you hear, by the way, some of the noise of the motorcade being broken apart behind us and the crowd just starting to disperse.
Yeah, they had put fences here. Now this, I don't know if this is the Kim Jong-un motorcade, if we're seeing that, or but they've been closing streets here very rapidly around this area. This is a city that okay. All right, let's go to Bill Neely right now on the ground outside the hotel. Bill?
Yes, so there's a motorcade arriving just behind me now, and as you can see, just great excitement from the Vietnamese people. And as you said, the security here is very, very tight indeed. Indeed, there are snipers on rooftops around here to provide security for both leaders. Lester, what's interesting is not just what will happen in the next 2 hours, and they are due to have that historic handshake in about 10 minutes' time, but what happened just before, because as President Trump was getting ready for this handshake, he was tweeting. He said, Kim and I will try very hard to work something out on denuclearization. And he also talked about having the cooperation of China, Russia, Japan and South Korea. I think we've just seen Kim Jong-un's motorcade go past. Apologies, I couldn't actually see. Normally there are 12 bodyguards running alongside that black Mercedes-Benz limousine, always running, never smiling, to provide security for Kim Jong-un. But certainly we believe President Trump is inside that hotel now. And as we know, they will have a 20-minute conversation, followed by the White House calling it a social dinner. And then President Trump will go back to his hotel around 9 o'clock Eastern time, where surely he will switch on the television and listen to Michael Cohen. It is certainly a possibility, and it will certainly be a distraction before tomorrow's summit. Lester?
Yeah, there is that. Yes, the president will certainly be paying attention to that, but the business at hand, we're told we're less than a minute away now that we will see the two leaders come out here in front of this shot you're looking at right now and greet each other. That'll be the first time we have seen them together and the first time they have been together on this tour. They were taking individual meetings today. President Trump was meeting with the Vietnam leadership here. He was signing there were some trade deals that were signed with U.S. companies, so there was other business at hand. This is the president's second trip to Vietnam. He was here for an economic conference in 2017.
End of 2017, yeah, and he spent a little bit of time in Hanoi, but not a ton. And when you look at what the president will do here, as Bill alluded to, he is still facing a lot of domestic drama back home, with Michael Cohen's testimony on Capitol Hill expected later on this morning. And the president has already tweeted about it. It is my guess unlikely the president will bring it up on his own as he is here with Kim. I'm told by one administration official that the president is 100% dialed in on this summit. But that, of course, is belied by the fact the president is tweeting about Cohen. As we take a look now at this video from just moments ago, one of the most remarkable things, Lester, and we saw it in Singapore as well, is North Korea is such a reclusive regime. We don't often get a window into how they operate, but when they come out, for example, to Singapore or here to Hanoi in Vietnam, you see the security and you see sort of this different side of Kim Jong-un. I think of the moment when he was spotted smoking on the train ride on the way through China here to Vietnam, for example. These are moments we just don't often get to see.
Yeah, that was so the picture you saw there, the motorcades, the limousines actually going into a shrouded off area where the two leaders are exiting separately, and they will come together in front of a pre-set up area with flags here momentarily, and that'll be the symbolic handshake. If I recall last time, the president several times reaching over and shaking Kim Jong-un's hand. He has made and stressed so often what a friendship that these two men have created, and when you just think back not too long ago, some of the bellicose language and the insults and the Rocket Man
fire and fury
comments.
Yeah.
It was a very dramatic turnaround after that last meeting. And by the way, after that last meeting, the president raising a lot of eyebrows with his proclamation that the nuclear threat from North Korea was over. I have spoken to scientists who have looked at satellite photos. They would tend to disagree. In fact, they would point to evidence that Kim Jong-un has actually expanded his capability in terms of ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons.
And while the White House will tout the fact that Kim Jong-un and the regime have not tested missiles in about a year and a half, the president's own intelligence officials say Kim has simply not given up his nuclear ambitions. In fact, both parties here cannot even agree on how to define denuclearization in the first place. So that is kind of the starting point at which these talks are beginning.
Our chief foreign affairs correspondent is Andrea Mitchell. She is in our Washington bureau. Andrea, what should we be watching here for? What will experts on the outside be watching here?
They're going to be watching very closely. As you and Hallie have been discussing, there is no evidence at all of denuclearization so far. None of the promises from Singapore have been realized. And the president has made claims to the contrary, despite denials from his own Secretary of State just this past weekend. The president had said the nuclear threat is over. He has also said most recently to the governors just this past weekend that he's happy as long as there's no testing. But no testing is not the real test, because even without testing, it can be very well believed that they have already achieved their goals. They don't need to test further. And as you just said, the intelligence officials testified to Congress that Kim Jong-un will not give up his nuclear ambitions. So as we see this motorcade arrival just moments ago, these dramatic pictures from Hanoi, all eyes are going to be on whether or not the personal diplomacy and his own belief in his ability to make a deal will trump the advice of his intelligence advisors, whom he has often criticized in public. Most recently, when they testified that Kim Jong-un was not ready to concede anything on his nuclear program, he said that they needed to go back to school. So there's a lot of nervousness among his intelligence advisors that he is going to ignore all of the evidence that you and Hallie and others have been citing, and that goes in the face of all of these grand claims that the president has been making. Lester?
Andrea, let me bring in, if I can, Victor Shaw. He's an NBC News Korea analyst. Victor, thank you for joining us. We talk about the pressure on President Trump to get something done, something concrete in this round of negotiations. But what kind of pressure do you think Kim Jong-un is over to come to the table and present a concrete idea?
Well, I think he's under pressure to keep the process going. I think the North Korean endgame is to try to get the United States to basically recognize North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapon state. When President Trump says we have plenty of time and starts lowering the bar in terms of saying that we have to find definitions of denuclearization that are similar, this is essentially part of North Korea's strategy to get the United States eventually to simply accept that they're a nuclear weapon state, with the promise of a freeze on production and a freeze on testing. So that's Kim's strategy. So I think the pressure for him is to ensure that he can get the president not to call these a failure, which it's very unlikely that the president will, given everything else that's happening, the need for a foreign policy success. And so I actually don't think there's a whole lot of pressure on Kim. There's much more pressure on the president to deliver all the things that he's boasted in the run-up to this meeting.
What's the saying? You got to give something to get something, and that essentially is what this is all about. And I guess the concerns are, what is the U.S. willing to give?
And I think that if it is among the constructs of what officials have described to us, there are some options. The sanctions that we talked about, the possibility that the U.S. could help negotiate a formal end to the Korean War, for example. Some of those incentives. Something
both sides want, both South Korea and North Korea want.
And those incentives, those kinds of things would be, I think, acceptable to the broader nuclear community. The question is, as you mentioned, there have been surprises before. The suspension of military exercises after the Singapore summit, for example. So I do think there are real questions about what could the X factor be this time around. We just don't know yet.
This is a president that, he was a television producer. He knows how to create drama.
Yeah.
Given the knowledge of what's happening back home with Michael Cohen, will there be a temptation to compete for the headline, essentially, here? Do something that will create an even bigger story?
There is a sense inside the White House that this should be the biggest story in the country right now, given that the president is trying to make history in Hanoi with Kim Jong-un. But you cannot deny what is happening back on Capitol Hill. And Lester, the president is not either. He tweeted earlier this morning that Michael Cohen was one of many lawyers who represented me. He talked about how Cohen was just disbarred, for example, for lying. He did bad things unrelated to Trump, too. You can see the tweet here. He's lying in order to reduce his prison time. This is the strategy you will see today from the White House, to work to discredit Cohen, to question his credibility. And even if the president wants what we're about to see to be the biggest headline coming out of the day, it is simply not going to be. He knows that, and that is why he's tweeting about it, Lester.
KRISTEN Welker's on Capitol Hill, essentially the other half of today's split screen moment. KRISTEN, set the scene there for us.
It certainly is a stunning split screen, Lester. There's no doubt about that. And we do have the testimony that Michael Cohen will be delivering here on Capitol Hill in just a matter of hours now. And it is set to be explosive. Cohen, based on this testimony obtained by NBC News from congressional aides, will call the president a racist and a con man, Lester.
All right, KRISTEN, here is the picture we've been waiting for. President Trump Kim Jong-un, shaking hands at the start of their second summit.
Mr. President, what do you hope to achieve in your talks with the chairman?
I think they'll be very successful. Great relationship. I think they're going to be very successful. We look forward to it. We both do.
Have you walked back at all on denuclearization in North Korea?
No. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Mr. President, you're going to share any including WELKER?
We'll see. We'll be seeing. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You're coming back.
Hard to read the body language, but things seemed a bit more somber at first, a bit more stone-faced. Members, I guess, the press pool asking questions. Could you hear?
It's tough to hear, and I know we're going to get a readout from the folks who are in the room shortly, but it sounded like the president talked about the great relationship. That's a phrase you could catch as they continue to speak now. Again, the audio a little bit difficult, although we should get better audio once we turn this around. There was that moment where both men broke into smiles. Let's see if we can hear the president here. And there goes the shot.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen. This is run by a pool, and they will decide what we're going to be able to see publicly and what not. But so they go into that one-on-one meeting.
Now they're going to the one-on-one meeting. We may see them one-on-one, the two of them, in another what you call spray, for example, before that small group dinner. What's interesting about what we just saw there are the moments when the two men broke into smiles, for example. There is always a question in these instances of choreography. Where do you go? Where do you stand? How long do you shake the hands, for example? But I am struck as we watch this again back, Lester, about what the president said repeatedly, including in September on the campaign trail about Kim. Remember when he said, "We fell in love"? He said it in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, but talked about how he and this dictator essentially have been trading letters back and forth, working toward denuclearization. The president has touted his sort of budding friendship with Kim, if you will, but it has to be noted, this is a person who is accused of serious human rights abuses in his own country, starving his people, for example, committing atrocities. That is not a focus of this summit. And when he asked White House officials about it, they said, listen, the focus is on denuclearization. Left unsaid is that doesn't mean the human rights abuses here.
Yeah, and you see Kim Jong-un, again, seems a bit more serious, not as broad grins that we saw in that first get-together. If we can go back to Andrea Mitchell, who's watching in our Washington newsroom. Andrea, what were you thinking as you were watching this compared to what we saw in Singapore?
Well, I think it's the same attempt to show friendship and to show a personal relationship. President Trump referred to Kim as his friend, which really shocked a lot of foreign policy advisors and critics alike back in Washington and around the world. Allies are all watching this as well. I think the body language was pretty friendly, and I think I heard the president say, I think it will be very successful in answer to a shouted question. We'll get the actual words translated and communicated by the pool, because the audio wasn't very good, as you were just pointing out. But it seems to me that the focus on friendship and the pen pal summit, him talking about the letters and showing people who come to the Oval Office these friendly letters from Kim Jong-un, is what has been most disturbing to foreign policy experts in both political parties, who have been really watching this with alarm, that this is already signaling that the president is making concessions and is lowering the bar for the summit.
Let me bring in Victor Cha again. Victor, the age difference, the power dynamic here between these two men. I'm sorry, this is a live picture we're looking at now. We should know this is the beginning of their one-on-one. Let's listen and see if we can hear anything.
I truly believe that this successful and great meeting that we're having today is thanks to the courageous decision, brutal decision that Mr. President
261일 동안 그 사이 보면 차강의 불신과 오해에 있는 소리들도 있고 그 적대적인 낡은 관행이 우리가 가는 길을 막으려고 했지만 우리는 그것들을 다 되돌리고 극복하고 해서 다시 마주 걸어서 261일 만에 여기 하노이까지 걸어왔습니다.
So during that 261 days since we last met, there have been some misunderstandings. that these eyes from the world who are misunderstanding her situation. And there was some hostility that still remained from the very, very past period, that from the outside. But however, we have been able to overcome all those obstacles, and here we are today after 261 days.
그 기간이 때문에 생각해보면 좀 어느 때보다도 많은 그 고민과 노력 그리고 그 인내가 필요했던 그런 기간이었던 것 같습니다.
And I truly believe that those 261 days were the days during which a lot of painstaking efforts were necessary, and also a lot of patience were needed.
그래서 우리는 오늘 여기서 이렇게 같이 만났습니다. 이번에 보다 더 모든 사람들이 반기는 그런 훌륭한 결과가 만들어질 거라고 확신하고 또 그렇게 되기 위해서 최선을 다하겠습니다.
But here we are today, sitting next to each other, and that gives us a hope that we will be successful this time, and I will really try to make that happen.
Thank you very much. That's really nice. Well, I wanted to say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. And it's great to be with you. We had a very successful first summit. I felt it was very successful. And some people would like to see it go quicker. I'm satisfied, you're satisfied. We want to be happy with what we're doing. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 김정은 위원장님 다시 만나게 되어서 영광입니다. 그리고 또 오늘 같이 하게 되어서 또 매우 기쁩니다. 우리가 베트남에서 만났습니다. 베트남이 아주 우리를 굉장히 환영을 하고 레드카펫을 깐 것처럼 그렇게 환영하고 있습니다. 우리는 첫 번째 그 정상회담을 굉장히 성공적으로 마쳤습니다. 어떤 사람들은 우리의 어떤 진전이 더 빨리 갔으면 하고 그렇게 원하는 사람도 있지만 내가 보기에는 우리가 상당히 잘하고 있고 또 첫 번째 그 정상회담이 굉장히 성공적이었습니다. 이번 회담도 첫 번째 것과 같은 성공 또는 아니면 더 성공하기를 바라고 있습니다. 그리고 우리는 아마 이번에 더 많은 진전을 이룰 것 같습니다.
And as I've said many times, and I say it to the press, I say it to anybody that wants to listen, I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen. And we will help it to happen.
우리 여러 번 제가 얘기를 했고 또 언론들한테도 제가 여러 번 했습니다만은 저는 조선이 엄청난 경제적인 잠재력을 가지고 있다라고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 큰 성공을 이룰 거로 생각합니다. 위대한 지도자 밑에서 아주 잘할 거로 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 그러한 성공을 저는 계속 보게 되기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to go have dinner. And then we have some big meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And we'll see you, I guess, at a news conference at some point during the day. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, any reaction to Michael Cohen and his testimony here?
All right, some introductory comments from both leaders as they now begin their one-on-one set of meetings. The president saying an honor to be with Chairman Kim. He talked about what he says was the success of the last summit, hoping this would be as good, as equal, if not better, than the last one. And then, as Hallie pointed out, already offering this idea that you have such economic potential, trying to get Kim Jong-un to understand what he could get out of this whole thing.
That is the crux of the argument that President Trump and the U.S. is trying to make to Kim in North Korea. And you heard him articulate it in this, what we call spray or opportunity to hear these leaders speak before their one-on-one meeting. That's what it all comes down to, Lester. And the question is whether Kim will be amenable to that and what exactly he is willing to give up. I should note that as we've been listening to these leaders speak, I know the audio has been tricky to hear, so let me explain from our colleagues in the room who are there. The president at one point was asked whether he has walked back the vow to denuclearize the peninsula. The president said no, and he was also asked if the president would declare an end to the Korean War. This is one of the incentives we had talked about. The president simply said, "We will see." He said, as you heard him there talking about the idea that this, he believes, could be a very successful second summit. He believes the first summit was successful, but Lester, as you know, when you talk with experts in the field, they question whether that's really the case, given that one of the commitments that Kim made then, right, last summer, was to work toward denuclearization, and that simply has not happened. So there are those who wonder, why are you having a second summit when the first didn't work out as you hoped? Now, the White House has made the point, and you heard the president there allude to it, this is not going to be a quick process. This is not a snap of the fingers, move on, get it done kind of a situation there. And the president has been clear. I think over the last 6 months, you've seen him really sort of shift towards this idea that you cannot put a clear end date on when this denuclearization process will happen. One thing I want to listen for is if he was asked about Michael Cohen. I couldn't tell if he was getting questions on that shouted to him. He didn't take any at the end of that discussion.
We'll get further readouts from those folks who were in the room. Now I want to go back to Victor Cha. And Victor, what I was asking was about the power dynamic between these two men when they sit down together. The president, obviously, the senior and age-wise person here in the room. How does that affect the pace of the negotiations and how this plays out?
Well, I think certainly between the two leaders, Trump is by far the more talkative one, and I think that's generally the way the conversations go. The North Korean leader in Korean uses the honorific form of speech, which he would use to an elder, which I think Trump loves. I mean, he loves that sort of adulation. What was interesting about that little clip that we saw was that when they translated the president saying, others have said this summit has not been a success, referring to Singapore, the North Korean leader laughed at that point, which means he's very well aware of the chatter in Washington and around town among foreign policy experts about how the Singapore summit didn't really produce any tangible results. So that to me was interesting, that he caught that and responded to that with a chuckle. The other thing I noticed is that Kim looks like he's gained a lot of weight since Singapore, and the president looks quite tired. He looks quite tired. These tete-a-tetes, usually they're about 20 minutes before the main dinner. If they go longer, that would be a sign that they're getting into a substantive conversation. But I really don't think that's going to be the case. I think the North Koreans see tonight's meeting as much more ceremonial and keeping it at a very superficial level, talking about how they both traveled long distances to meet with each other, you know, these sorts of niceties. And then I think the hard discussion will come tomorrow.
Victor Cha, appreciate your analysis. So the cameras have shut off now for this one-on-one session with interpreters, we should note, and they will retire to one of the dining rooms, one of the restaurants there in the hotel for this, what may, as Victor noted, a ceremonial dinner. But as you noted, there are some key players at that dinner table.
Yeah, so on the U.S. side will be the Chief of Staff, the acting Chief of Staff, we should note, Mick Mulvaney, along with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Kim will have two of his top advisors, two of his top aides, including Kim Yong-chol, who have been intimately involved in these nuclear negotiations. These are not new players to the scene, Lester. These aren't rookies to the table, if you will. These are men who know sort of the process and have been part of these discussions because over the years, of course, Kim has made promises that he simply has not followed through on. So it'll be the six of them around the table for dinner after this one-on-one where we see these two.
And then tomorrow, of course, much greater detail. We are going to be following all this. If events warrant, we'll certainly come back on the air. And for now, I'm Lester Holt, live from Hanoi. Good day, everyone.